All right, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I apologize I turned your air conditioning off because that buzzing in the background makes the sound horrible, and so we want it to sound better. So, we're going to start. We've got a couple chairs, standing room only to go. We apologize for that, but it's a good problem to have. And that gives us goals to meet in the future. Well, welcome to the Friday Night Speaker Series. This is our third. We had Dr. John Anfinson in May. We had Captain Lee Hendricks in June. And tonight we have another guest. First of all, thanks to all the Prescott Area Historical Society members who make this possible. I'm the storyteller. People see me. There's 15 people who made this possible, and there, plus more. Errol Marilla, Trish Foreman, Tracy Franick, Elise Block, Mary Pat House, Linda Bjorklund, Tom Blank, Tim Paul, Chris Baltasak, Jessica London, Susan Metcalf, Tom and Kathy Osh, Joe Globitz, and McCoulter Eaton when we have something heavy that we can't lift. I would like to thank all the people who continue to bring in items. Almost every single day I have more history landing in my hands. And so our displays have expanded. We're putting new photos up continually. So come in more than once. Come in more than once. Next come the grants to make all of this possible. First of all, the Robert and Alice Merkard family. In memory of Bob. Bob was a licensed pilot and a staunch backer of everything Prescott for his entire life. We can't thank them enough. The J. Mack Gamble Foundation on the Ohio River is a steamboat and river preservation group, and they made it possible for us to give away the brochure, 32 pages of history, so you have to thank them. And then we've had another stroke of good fortune. Some of you will know these people. We had a substantial grant from the family of Deanna and Ken. Ken was a member of the Prescott Area Historic Society from the second year he moved to town in the 1950s. And so if he's up there smiling at us tonight, this is what he dreamed of. Remember, as soon as I start talking, there are people who will say this is true. My brain falls out and rolls away. So make sure that you sign our guest book in the other room, because I'll forget. We're always looking for new members. This has been a lot of fun. It's a lot of work, but it's a lot of fun. We have jobs for people, simple jobs, complex jobs, or whatever. But if you're a history geek, please come and join us. Remember the copies? If you have a copy already, don't get two, but they're right over here, and those are free. Now tonight is an unusual conference. We have with us today History of the Ages, steamboat pilot George Byron Merrick, who was raised in Prescott. He has returned. We've asked him to share some of his stories of the old times on the upper Mississippi River. Mr. Merrick hasn't noticed that the times have changed. So keep in mind that he is speaking to you as he would have about 1875. So please, it is my pleasure to introduce you to George Byron Merrick.
Thank you. Thank you. Things have changed a little bit. They're very strange in my knowledge. But it's a rare pleasure to be with you here in Prescott, my old hometown. I hope you don't mind if I defrock here in the heat. This is an auspicious place to be. Think about it. This is the confluence of many things. It's the confluence of Indian tribes in the past, where the Sioux and the Chippewa battled it out south of town and established borders between the tribes. It's a place where the French brought European culture in and merged it with the Native American culture. It's the crossroads of steamboats and later railroads. And it is certainly the confluence of the St. Croix River and the Mississippi. So, looking at the river, the old route of the Minnesota Packet Company was from Dubuque. La Crosse was sort of in the center point, and St. Paul was the northernmost terminus. And right below St. Paul is Prescott, where we are today. Very, very wonderful to be here on the crossroads, the confluence of the rivers. Now, Prescott is also favored with the outside arc of the river, as is Hastings. You want to be on the outside arc because that means the river will scour the shore and keep the water deep enough for the boats. If you're on the inside, it's going to fill in and you're going to have trouble. But we can see how the channel of the Mississippi, although it's very wide, the deepest part that we use for steamboats wanders back and forth. And it wanders over to Hastings on the Minnesota side, and then back, crosses over, and right in front of Prescott here. But more importantly, even, is the entrance of the St. Croix River, because even in low water, there was 25 feet of depth most occasions, and holes 70 to 80 feet deep. The St. Croix was a very wonderful river to travel almost any time in the past. And it also provides a good flow of water into the Mississippi when the Mississippi was drying up. Well, the names of the rivers. Willard and his brother Lafayette Bunnell across the river traded with the Indians many years, and a trader would always want to know what the Indian's name for a place was, because you're going to trade, you need to use terms that they use. And Mississippi, they recorded, the Bunnells recorded, is in several languages. In the Chippewa, it's Mississippi, very close to Mississippi. Big river, great river. The Sioux, it was Wapateka, or Big River again. The Winnebago was a little bit different. Bluff-walled river, Niskashutara. But in every case, it was the big river, the Grand River. Never the father of waters. That's a white man term. Mississippi means big river. And if you lived locally and you said big river, there's no question what we're talking about, right? Unless you're a little bit south of town and there is a big river. Now the St. Croix, I always wondered who St. Croix was. And of course there is no St. Croix. But Father Hennepin, when he first came up the river, talked to the Indians and he asked for the name of this river. And what they told him, he translated into French as Rivière Tombeau, the river of tombs or the river of graves. He gave a pretty lame explanation of that, but we do know there were battles back and forth between the Chippewa and the Sioux, and there were probably many burials along the river, or perhaps many burial mounds over the years. But the French in 1688 built a fort way farther up, and it was Fort Sainte Croix for the Holy Cross. And from the fort, the river takes its name, and we've shortened it to St. Croix, but it's Sainte Croix. Well, I was actually born in Niles, Michigan, 1841, and my pa brought the family to Prescott in 1854. It was my older sister Eliza, my younger brother Sam, and I. It was a beautiful sunny day, as I recall, in June when we came to Prescott. And my pa was dock agent for the Minnesota Packet Company. It was wonderful to have a dock because otherwise you'd have to put your freight on the wet sand, and anything that couldn't tolerate water, of course, would be ruined. So there was always a charge, and it was a percentage of the value, but no charge less than 25 cents. And my pa tasked my brother Sam and I to skylark around and make sure nobody put anything on our dock without paying that 25 cents. And I don't think anybody got away with it. We lived in the upper floors of the warehouse where my pa had his storage and where he ran a little store out of. And from that vantage point, my brother Sam and I could see all the boats coming day or night, and we got to know them by name, by shape, by the chimneys and the bells and the whistles. So we knew very well all of the boats that were coming up and down the river. And we just lived the life of Huck Finn and Tom Sawyer on the riverbank. Now, Prescott in those days was a frontier town, a Wild West town. There were some 200 white people surrounded by 500 Indians, 500 Chippewa, and another 500 of the Red Wing Sioux. And on a Saturday night, there would likely be war whoops, gunpowder, scalping knives, stray bullets, until the sheriff drove the hostiles out of town. Maybe things haven't changed all that much. Well, Brother Sam and I were always welcome in the camps of the Indians. My pa was a fair trader, and actually back in Niles, Michigan, he had prevented a massacre. The people in Niles, the white people, were getting afraid that the Indians were going to attack, and my pa knew that they were peaceful. He went out to the tribe and brought back the chief Pokagon, and they assured the locals that there was no intention to wipe out anybody. He restored the peace. He was a fair trader here as well, and so we were always welcome in the camps of the Indians. Now, 200 whites surrounded by 1,000 Indians, we watched them, and they watched us from the heights. And my pa knew very well that they had been here for maybe 1,000 years or more, and they knew a lot about the territory. The one autumn, my pa asked, the elders would come in to trade every once in a while, and my pa asked the elder, "Is it going to be a cold winter?" Well, the elder didn't say anything. He would have to go consult whatever. And then when he came back, he said, "Yes, cold winter." So my pa tasked Sam and I to cut wood, stack it against the warehouse, get ready for winter. And then my pa decided to ask, was it going to be a long winter? And again, the chief had to consult his sources, came back and said, "Yes, long winter." So again, my pa told us, cut more wood. The word spread throughout Prescott, and everybody's cutting wood, getting ready for that long, cold winter. My pa decided to ask, "How is it, Chief, that what is it that you consult to know the weather that's coming?" And Chief said, "White man, cut much wood." Well, we were levee rats, and lived on the levee. And one of the things that we were able to do was trade with the Indians for the little dugout canoes. They had many of those made out of a log, scraped out. And interesting to realize, there were very few birch bark canoes on the Mississippi. A birch bark canoe is good for portaging. There's no portages on the Mississippi. So you'd want a canoe that lasts. Birch bark canoe leaks all the time. You have to repair it. And a dugout canoe lasts darn near forever. So there were a number of these available, and us kids would be able to trade for them. And they were small things, 6 or 8 feet long, carry a boy, his lunch, and a cane pole, and that's about it. About 3 or 4 inches of freeboard on each side. And since the bottom was round, you could grab a hold of that and roll it. And it was quite entertaining to the passengers of the steamboats. And we would do that and stand up on the gunwales and wave for coins, and occasionally they'd throw a penny or something. We'd try to catch it. And there were many hunting and fishing trips that my brother Sam and I took up and down the river, and got into some trouble with that. One summer, we were down in Trudell Slough as a summer thunderstorm was breaking, and we knew we had to get home because my ma was waiting for supper, and we couldn't be late for supper. So we began to paddle across. Sam was in his canoe. I was in the lead. There was nothing I could do for Sam, and I knew he was a strong paddler, so I just kept going, and he followed me. And later, he told me that he was afraid he'd lost me a couple of times because we would go down in the troughs of the waves, and he couldn't see me. I didn't look back to see him, but he thought he'd lost me for sure. But we made it across, and after that, for some reason, there was a mothers association formed in town. They wanted to get rid of those little Indian canoes, but they're awful darn hard to hide on the river. Another time, we were down south of town on the prairie. Sam was by his canoe, and I had gone in to investigate a little bit, and suddenly there was a timber wolf and 6 of his buddies, and they were running very fast towards me. Now Sam could get in his canoe and paddle away, but I couldn't get back in time, and so I climbed the only thing that was available, a single little scrub oak tree. It was the only thing in the prairie that I could get up. And those wolves had me treed. It seemed like an hour. Maybe it wasn't, but it was a long time for me with them nipping at my heels. And then all of a sudden they noticed something off in the distance, and they ran off. And I don't believe we told my mom about that incident. It's miraculous that we levee rats survived. Not one boy drowned. And to my knowledge, to date, not one of the boys has been hanged yet. Well, getting to the steamboat trade, of course there were side wheelers and stern wheelers. The side wheelers were the passenger boats, the luxurious passenger carriers, came first before they figured out how to cantilever a wheel on the aft end of the boat. And the stern wheelers were pretty much work boats. They would carry passengers as well. But the motto of the Minnesota Packet Company, safety, speed, and comfort. And the way the cabins were set up was to demonstrate that. Ladies' cabins in the aft end of the boat. There would be a stove at each end for winter or late fall and spring trips. If you got cold, you come out of your stateroom and sit by the stove. There'd be a library and likely a piano for a hymn sing in the ladies' cabins. The pastry kitchen and pantry would be available to passengers. You could see all the wonderful things they were making. And the scalding of the chickens and the butchering of the hogs was down below the ladies' cabin, so you didn't see that. There was also a post office on board and a barber shop for the gentlemen. And should there be drinking allowed, there would be a bar in the gentleman's cabin area. But this was just to keep their minds off of the boilers, which were under the gentlemen's cabins. For should the boilers explode, the ladies' cabins would be safe, and this was a source of endless comfort to the gentlemen, especially after a whiskey or two. After dinner would be served in the main saloon, the main hall of the boat, and after dinner, a heavy curtain would be drawn across, and there'd be no mixing of the sexes after dark. So in the spring of 1856, the Kate Castle was frozen in, I think down by Diamond Bluff. And the captain and the mate came walking up on the ice looking for crew for the coming season. And I had completed the 8th grade of education, and it was allowed that was enough education. Any more might make me a sissy, and so I could work earn a little bit of money for the family. And also a friend of mine, Sam Fifield, the two of us went on board as cabin boys. Well, we soon realized this was more like knife shiners. There wasn't much to the duties except cleanup. And in the winter, I was a printer's devil, again, mostly cleaning the print and putting it away rather than setting it up. And Sam also did printing work too. But I was disappointed. After just a few trips, Sam quit the steamboat. And he never did amount to much. He went on to become the lieutenant governor of the state of Wisconsin, and here I am. Well, I had a number of jobs on the boat over the years. Cabin boy on the Katy Castle. And the following year, I had the opportunity to become a cub engineer and learn about the engine room. And I thought this would be a good career to be in, learn about those things. But working in the engine room is hot, even hotter than today, and sweaty. And the switching of the machinery to make the wheel go forward or reverse required, in those early days, that the shafts be unhooked from the upper level and rehooked on the lower level. And the bar was 50 pounds, so it was a lot of heavy lifting. And the worst part was at the end of every trip, I was the smallest one. I had to climb into the boiler after the water had been let out. There's still about 90 degrees in there. And with a candle and a chain, I had to scrape the mud off the flues, and they'd be washed out. That was a terrible job. Fortunately, I met Charlie Hargis, who became a very good friend of mine. And when his second clerk position, the second clerk that he had, got sick, he promoted me or asked me to come up and do clerking. After that, I was a cub pilot on the equator. We'll talk about that a little bit. Piloting, did some minor piloting. These are very small boats, and but it gave me practice as a steersman and a pilot. And in '61, the Fannie Harris, I was working on her, and she down by on the Fever River, she ran so hard to ground they had to build works under it to slide it back to the river. And while that was going on, I got the opportunity to serve on the Golden Era, a very deluxe boat of the time. And then finally back to the Fannie Harris until I joined the Army. So what does the captain do, you might ask? The captain's a goodwill ambassador. He's perhaps a concierge to the passengers, promoter of the boat. He's owner or part owner. Directs the pilot where to go, and but not how to get there. The pilot is the one who knows how to get the boat through the channel. And one example of the captains taking care of the passengers, a lady came on board one time, and I'm sorry, she had an ugly baby. It wasn't just normal baby ugly, it was severe baby ugly. And fella came out of the bar area and he said, "Whoo-wee, that's an ugly child. I seen a rear end of a plow mule cuter than that child. Did you have to pay extra for bringing that child on for fright of the passengers?" And he went on and on. It wasn't right. And the lady rightly complained to the captain. And the captain put the gentleman, if you call him a gentleman, on shore. And he said to the lady, "Now, I apologize for this terrible indiscretion. You must sit at my table this evening. You will have the first choice of all the dishes that we have and the finest drinks and so forth." And he said, "We'll even get you a banana for the monkey." Now, there were captains that were known to be pious captains, and they ran a pious boat. One of those was Captain Orrin Smith. He was really a fun guy. You should see his picture. He was just a barrel of fun. He was a pious captain, and no dancing, especially on Sunday, no drinking, no dancing, no gambling, no hanky-panky, church services on the boat. And most of the boats didn't run on Sunday. It was just a thing. But there were a number of captains that were known to be pious captains and ran pious boats. And one of those also was William F. Davidson. When he took over boats for the white collar line, he eliminated the bars to his financial loss to make them dry boats. And his prayers were, he said prayers before the voyage and before the meals and so forth, and his prayers are remembered down to today. One of his prayers, he beseeched the Lord to provide to every poor family a barrel of pork, a barrel of flour, a barrel of sugar, a barrel of salt, a barrel of pepper. Oh, hell no, that's too much pepper. Amen. Now, one time, a captain caught a gentleman in a lady's cabin, and he had his shoes off, if you can imagine this. And the captain said, "If you want to play Adam and Eve, I will oblige you." And he set them ashore on an island in the Mississippi and steamed off. So that took care of that. Now, being a steersman, leading on to being a cub pilot and being a pilot, was something that I was allowed to do with my acquaintance with several of the captains. Should I pay them $500 after obtaining my pilot's license? So this was a wonderful opportunity I had. And learning the river was something that went back to the steamboat Bel Air in 1844. And during high water, the Bel Air found itself churning through the streets of Chester, Illinois. And in an attempt to turn around, it knocked down the upper floors of the hotel. And heading back to the river, it punched a hole in the county jail with no apparent respect for law and order. And it made it back to the river and collided with another boat, and it would have sunk, but they ran it aground. After all that, the Congress of the United States decided that pilots need to be licensed, and they need to have the certification of 2 other pilots that they know what they're doing. Now, a pilot needs to know every mile of the river, going up, going down, during day and night. That's 4 rivers. And pilots were usually licensed for just a segment of the river. You might be licensed from Prescott to Stillwater and not on the Mississippi, because those mistakes would be crucial. Down in Lansing, Iowa, there's a bluff, and when the moon is in the west, there's a shadow cast out into the river, and it looks like the bluff is in the river. And a trained pilot knows he has to steer right for that bluff because that's where the channel is. And an untrained pilot will try to go around the shadow, like the pilot of the Key City did one time, ran aground so hard both chimneys crashed down on the deck. So you need to know where you're going at all times. Sometimes when the water is high, you could take a cut off a corner of the river and go across a field, but you had to be careful not to get in the field when the water was going down. One pilot found himself in a cornfield with his steamboat on the ground, got to town and telegraphed to the owners, "I'm stuck in cornfield, what shall I do?" And they said, "Farm, you landlubber." He was sacked. Well, a pilot has to avoid, sandbars, snags, overhanging trees that will tear pieces off the boat. Log rafts have the right of way. And sometimes you have to blow your whistle to clear the cattle out of the channel because the water in the Mississippi was very low on some occasions. Tom Cushing was another very good pilot, and he saved the Fannie Harris back in 1861. Fannie Harris was coming through the St. Paul Rapids during high water. A current of 8 to 12 miles an hour. It was pretty swift. And the underwriters required there to be a rapids pilot, somebody who was familiar with the rapids and knew how to steer the boat through the rocky areas. But the pilot that we had, the rapids pilot, hit a rock, and one of the rudders was torn off of the boat, making a horrible noise. And the rapids pilot yelled, "She is gone," and he left the wheel and ran out of the pilot house. Well, Tom Cushing jumped to the wheel, told me to grab the other side, and the two of us fought with that wheel for 6 miles through the rapids and got her safely to shore, where the rapids pilot was fired and kicked ashore. And then we took the boat down to Galena without much further effort. So it's quite a tricky thing. Now, another good story of a lightning pilot, and these don't come from the fellows involved. These come from witnesses that saw what happened. But this is Stephen Hanks. He was said to be a cousin to Abe Lincoln. He piloted rafts and then steamboats later, and worked on the river for maybe 72 years. He found himself in 1864 coming down from St. Paul, and at Pig's Eye Bar, the Northern Belle, another steamboat, was stuck. And there was only a narrow space between that boat and the shore. And Hanks lined the boat he was on, the War Eagle, he was piloting, and ordered full speed ahead. And when they got close to enough, just to the right point, he ordered to stop the engines. And the water behind the boat came forward, lifting the boat up, providing just a little bit more water, and he had lined it up true, and away she went through. That seems like a fanciful story about the water coming up, but it had been done by other pilots as well. But this is a lightning pilot that can do that kind of thing. Well, the steamboats in those days lasted less than 5 years, but a steamboat company could pay for the boat more than many times in the 5 years, and so it was still a steamboat bonanza. But they were light boats, and they came apart very easily in storms. The War Eagle was headed up Lake Pepin the summer of 1866 with Hanks at the wheel. They had been at Reed's Landing and looked like the storm had passed, and so they pulled out and started up. And a second wave of the storm came in. Gale force winds, very dark, and the waves on Lake Pepin began to hit the boat. Now, Pepin whips up pretty good because it's shallow, 20-foot depth in most places. And so that whips up pretty fast, and those boats, those rollers coming at the boat were pounding it endlessly. Hanks had to keep the boat into the force of the wind and the waves, which is not easy. The shallow draft boat with a high structure on it is easily caught by the wind, but he was able to keep it in the straight line. Passengers and they all were praying. Everybody thought it was going to be a disaster. And they finally made it to Lake City and got under the point that sticks out there, and so they survived. But Hank's comment was that the swells tore the planking loose of the guards from bow to wheelhouse. From the bow to the wheel of the boat, the planking was ripped loose. This is the planking outside of the hull. So the hull was safe, but the boat was coming apart. And amazing that they made it. I had an opportunity to experience some of the joy of a thunderstorm in the pilot house. Leaving from Lake Pepin here, we were taking 300 people up to Stillwater for some event, and on the H.S. Allen in 1860. And the first pilot took sick. The captain allowed that I could pilot the boat up St. Croix, since there's only a few places that are really shallow and narrow to get through. And so off we took, and we saw a thunderstorm in the distance and thought it would be okay, we could get past that. But it was coming at us at a rapid speed. And if you notice up in the pilot house, there's no glass in the front of the pilot house. The pilot can't be obstructed from his vision of the river. But there's a visor that you can pull down, and there's a breastboard that you can pull up. But there's still holes there to look out. And the horizontal rain and wind coming in, and it was April, and there was snow as well coming in. I was drenched in the pilot house and shaking at the wheel, and the captain, wearing a heavy coat dressed for the weather, was out on the deck watching for the shore. The shore disappeared many times. We couldn't tell where we were. You couldn't see anything with the rain and the fog and the snow coming down. At one point it lifted off, and I found that I was headed down river instead of up river. So we got turned around, and the captain asked me if I wanted to tie up. And my stubborn-headedness said, no, we'll go on, but get me a drink of brandy. And so he had brandy sent up, and we made it up to Stillwater. There were wind braces on the pilot house because in a strong wind, the pilot house might be blown completely off of the boat. And of course, the thing that was always terrifying to me was the thought of lightning striking the pilot house. More likely it would hit the chimneys, and it did. If it hit the chimneys, it would travel down into the boiler, into the engine room, and the engineers knew enough during a lightning storm to keep their hands off the metalwork. It would go down to the metalwork and out the aft end of the boat where the wheel was. Now, racing on the river, down below, the Natchez and the Robert E. Lee racing was just a made-up thing. They scheduled it. The Robert E. Lee took no passengers, no freight on board, not much in the way of passengers, but they did sell tickets. It was a whole made-up thing. But racing on the upper river here was done anytime two boats came together, going in the same direction, no matter what they were carrying. And they would race from even Dubuque to St. Paul, unloading and loading on the way, and one of the boats would, if it was not unloading, would wait for the other one, and then they would race again, get to another unloading place and wait, and then race again. And that's a unique thing about our upper river. They would race anytime, anywhere. As a matter of fact, Captain Jones Warden was the captain of the Key City, and he had never been beat, it was said. But when they were coming down from St. Paul one time, he had to stop for wood, and so he pulled in, and the Northerner went behind him. And then it appeared in the Prescott newspaper that the Northerner had beat the Key City in a race. Well, it wasn't a race. They didn't even notice him going by. But Captain Warden had his hackles up. And the next trip, he came up, and although he didn't usually go up the St. Croix, he heard that the Northerner was up at Stillwater. And so he turned, went up to Stillwater. When he got there, the Northerner was backing out. The Key City went around the aft end of the Northerner, thereby circling her, fair start, and they raced down Lake St. Croix. When they got down to Prescott, the Key City was about a mile ahead. And this is that auspicious thing again. He ran the Key City full bell. Ned West was the pilot, full speed through the Narrows here at Point Douglas, and turned the boat up to St. Paul without slowing down. It was a feat that was rarely repeated. And, you know, when you read about that, you can't quite understand it until you look out here and you see how narrow that is and how short a space you have to turn the boat on the Mississippi. Well, sometimes the race was a little bit ridiculous. The War Eagle was a wonderful, fast boat, had 4 boilers, 19-inch cylinders, 200 feet long, about a 300-ton boat. And the Itasca was, well, didn't hardly look like a steamboat. It was a little pusher, a little ferry boat. And you can see when you compared the two side by side, they were just not a match at all. But the Eureka was headed down to Montrose, Iowa, chugging, sputtering, blubbering along. And here come the War Eagle, big, fast, white whoosh past the Eureka, leaving the old Eureka bobbing in its wake. But then the War Eagle ran aground. And here comes the little Eureka sputtering, blubbering, chugging along past the War Eagle. And within sight of Montrose, Iowa, the War Eagle got off of the sandbar, and here it comes again, whoosh, the big white, fast, speedy War Eagle, right past the little Eureka again, bobbing in the wake, and the War Eagle ran hard aground again. And so the little Eureka chugged on into Montrose, Iowa, the winner of the race. And if you had tried to bet on that ahead of time, you would have picked the wrong boat. There was another race from Red Rock to St. Paul. It was the end of the season, November of 1864. The Albany was towing barges, and John Rumsey was at shore and saw the Albany coming by, and they had the same number of barges. And so they said, let's race them. It's the last trip of the season. Let's race them to St. Paul. And so off they went. D.W. Heilman was in the pilot house. Captain Nathaniel Harris was down below watching ahead to the river. And the boats were side by side. The barges on the inner side were touching, and the crew were exchanging the usual compliments across between the boats. And they were at the St. Paul levee, the foot of Broadway. It was 3 a.m. And down in the boiler room of the Rumsey, there's a little whistle. And boom! The boilers of the Rumsey exploded. The force of the blast blew across the barges and hit the Albany as well. The pilot house went up in the air and came smack down on the deck below. D.W. Heilman still at the wheel. He climbed down to the front of the pilot house down below, pulled Captain Harris out of the wreckage. He had broken his leg, and the Rumsey was gone. It was blown to smithereens, and the barges they were towing floated off downriver. The Albany, I believe, tried to catch some of them, but it was the end of the Rumsey. Windows were rattled 2 miles away, and there were 5 crew members on the Albany that were killed, but also 5 on the Rumsey and 2 on the Albany, with that blast going across. The force of a steam explosion is the most powerful natural force on the earth. Well, another race that was hard to imagine, Captain Daniel Smith Harris had built his last boat, the Gray Eagle. He spent twice as much as you'd normally spend to build a boat. It was a beautiful boat. And he wanted to make a name for the boat, so there was a race opportunity, and he was going to take advantage of it. The Itasca was at Prairie du Chien with Captain Whitten, and the Gray Eagle was at Rock Island. They were 65 miles apart at the start of the race. Well, why race? It was a time when the first transatlantic cable had been completed across the Atlantic. And there was a telegram from Queen Victoria to President Buchanan, congratulations and wonders of the world and how close we are connected now, our 2 continents and so forth. The telegraph lines ran to Rock Island and it ran to Prairie du Chien. It did not run up to St. Paul or anywhere north of there. So Captain Harris knew, he was carrying the telegraph, and he knew that the other boat, the Itasca, would also be carrying that telegram as well. So off they started. Harris, not slowing for anything. And of course, Captain Whitten and the Itasca didn't realize there was a race on for quite a while. By the time Harris got to La Crosse, he had shortened the distance by half. When they went past Winona to put out the males, they swung a fella out on a spar, and he threw the males to the shore, and they kept going, didn't stop for anything. Well, eventually, Captain Whitten noticed this black smoke off in the trees, and he realized that somebody was coming awful fast, and he was able to put two and two together, and so he began to pour on the speed. So as they approached, went through Hastings, and as they approached the St. Paul dock, they were neck and neck, side by side. There wasn't inches between them. But the Itasca had the inside track and was able to touch the dock first. Nevertheless, Captain Harris was on the forecastle of the boat with that telegram wrapped around a piece of coal. And at the last minute, he threw it to his agent on the dock and thus won the race by a stone's throw. And they just don't get any closer than that. There were a number of explosions. Sometimes the paper was pretty cavalier in reporting them. On the Key City in October of 1863, a few miles above Winona, the paper reported that there was an explosion on board, damaging the woodwork and machinery to a great extent. What? It was not a boiler explosion. Either the head blew off the cylinder or the cylinder cracked and exploded. And it blew upward, destroyed one of the cabins above where the engine was. And sleeping in the next cabin was Mr. Cooley, the second clerk. Well, the force of the explosion destroyed the cabin next to him and half of his cabin, and it took the blanket off of his bed that he was sleeping under, threw that up in the air, and one of his boots went up in the air, and he did not wake up. There's something there about a sound echo or shadow. So when the crew woke him up, they told him to be careful how he got out of bed. And he was known ever after as a sound sleeper. Well, I had the opportunity to be on the wreck of the Equator on Lake St. Croix in 1858. Asa Green was the captain. He was a Methodist minister in the wintertime and made more money probably as a captain of the boat in the summer, and probably spent it all in the winter with his flock. The engineer, John Lay, was a clever man. Mate Ruley was awesome, and Charlie Jewell was the pilot, and I was the second pilot in the pilot house. We went up stream, got past Afton, and once we passed Catfish Bar, the bluffs flatten out, and the prairie wind catches you at that point. And there was quite a storm blowing. This was a stern wheel boat. A side wheel boat has the advantage of the wheels being making the boat much wider. They act as outriggers, and a side wheel boat will not capsize. It will lift one wheel out of the water, perhaps, but it will not capsize. A stern wheel boat will capsize, and many did, because they're narrow. The hull is, maybe 3 to 5 feet deep, but you have all of this structure above. So we were hit by the wind. The boat is leaning way over. We're still able to maintain forward motion until down in the engine room, the rock shaft breaks and the engine stops. I can't explain to you exactly what the rock shaft is. It's the piece that keeps the pitman arm going Anyway, the wheel is not turning. John Lay, the engineer, is immediately trying to unhook one side of the wheel and run it with one, and it was not possible to do that. Charlie Jewell left me in the pilot house to go down below, and he said, listen for any instructions that come up from the engineer, but there would be none. The captain was making sure everybody had life jackets and was staying calm, and the mate, Ruley, was the one who saved us. When we stopped our forward motion, the next wave hit the back of the boat and flooded quite a bit. We had a foot of water in the hull, and we were in danger of falling off into the troughs of the waves and either capsizing or just sinking. 2 miles from shore. It's April. There was snow in the air. People were terrified, and what Mate Ruley did was he brought down the spars that were in the front of the boat, lashed them together, put a lashing in the center, threw the mess overboard, and it acted as a sea anchor and pulled the boat into the wind. So we were traveling into the wind, although we were drifting closer to the shore. After about an hour, we hit the shore, the boat turned again full into the wind, and the wind and the waves destroyed the boat on the shore. But we were in about 4 feet of water, and so the gentlemen were able to carry the ladies off the boat, and no lives were lost, but the boat was a total wreck due to wind and waves. And the bones of the boat lay up there for many years after that. So these were lightweight boats. They had to be to sail a shallow river. Well, we're getting to the end here, and do want to recall the Fannie Harris, which was probably my favorite boat. I served most of the time on her. And in 1861, when the rebels attacked Fort Sumter, President Lincoln put out the call for 75,000 volunteers, and we were tasked to go to Fort Ridgely to bring down the cannon that were up there. Now, this is up the Minnesota River, 300 crooked miles by river, but about 100 miles as the crow flies. The Minnesota River is a terrible, torturous snake of a river. And it would have been tough to get a 200-foot boat up that river normally, but there was a 19-foot rise in the water due to the spring melt, snow melt. And so the river was wide open, and there was a strong current, which was a problem. There were the possibility that we could cut across some of the twists in the river and make it a little bit shorter. But the force of the water, where the banks were high, was a problem getting up that snaky river. As the boat went around the curve, the force of the current would slam it into the shore. And there was nothing we could do to get off the shore except put men in a yawl, have them go across to the opposite side of the river with a rope, tie it around a tree, and then with a capstan, we would pull the boat off of the shore and head for the next curve, and then it would be slammed the other way, and we would repeat the process. It took us 4 days to get up to Fort Snelling. Every time the boat slammed into the shore, pieces were torn off, overhanging trees ripped off the sides and the cabins and the roof of the boat. And then we tried to cut off some of the river, go over some open territory at Belle Plaine. We were assured there was nothing in the way, no farmhouses, no fences or anything, because of the 19-foot rise. And so they picked a place where the trees were shallow on the edge of the river, pushed through at full speed, and then there was music. As the rear stern wheel went over those trees, they came up in the wheel and tore apart the buckets of the wheel and a dozen of the arms. It shredded the wheel, and we stopped, anchored, and men were sent out on the wheel to repair it in the dark, with the knowledge that if they fell in the water, they would be gone because the current would just have carried them away. We did make it to Fort Ridgely in a dilapidated condition, brought down Sherman's battery of light artillery, which left Fort Ridgely pretty much unarmed, and there were 500 Sioux Indians camped in front of the fort. This was part of the later 1862 massacre up there. They had to bring the limber and the cannons down a long, narrow ramp with mules. On one occasion, the whole thing, mules, limber, cannon, men, rolled down the bank. Amazingly, nobody was killed, and even the mules were cut out of the traces and were okay. But as we withdrew the cannon, the Indians were watching. And this later led to their attack on the fort, which was repelled, but still the New Ulm massacre was partly initiated by removing any cannon that were up there to be sent back to Washington. Well, the damage to the boat was severe, and the government man on board said, "Never mind, the government will pay, the government will pay." And we lost anything that was sticking up, damage on both sides, damage to the wheel. We delivered the battery to La Crosse. It was the closest railroad, railhead, and 100 men went to work fixing the boat. They received $8,000 for damage to the boat, which is about half to a third of the cost of the boat. Some of the crew deserted at Fort Snelling. Others deserted or left for the Union Army in August from the Fannie Harris, including me. The entire crew left for Company A of the 30th Wisconsin Volunteers, and our general was Alfred Sully. We went up the Missouri River. Interesting enough, Sully was a terrific watercolor painter, and he painted many of the camps that we lived at. In '64, I was transferred to the War Department in Washington, in charge of records, and mustered out there in 1865, but stayed in clerkship till 1867. At a social engagement in Washington, I met Marietta Brooks Smith of Norwich, Connecticut, lovely lady, and we were married in October of 1866. We've aged a little since then, but in 1869, our daughter Alice Winona, thinking of Winona, Minnesota, was born in New York City. And we lived there until 1876. Now, in the 1870s, I had the opportunity to hear Mr. Samuel Clemens give a talk at the Lafayette Avenue Church in Brooklyn, where we lived. And after the talk, he and I walked him back to his hotel, where we smoked long black cigars and swapped tales and stories and experiences and lies about the river. And I have to agree with one comment that Mr. Clements made. He said, as boys, we had the hope that if we lived and were good, God would permit us to be pirates. Well, that ambition faded, but the one ambition that has continued even down unto this day is the ambition to be a steamboat man and to stand behind the wheel of a Mississippi steamboat. Well, folks, you are all steering your way down the rivers of your lives, and what you need for a successful voyage is the love of family and friends to give you a full head of steam, and the good Lord to give you high water. And so until we meet again out on the levee, This is George Byron Merrick wishing you a full head of steam and high water.
Thank you, Mr. Merrick.
Yes, sir.
The historical character of George Merrick was portrayed by Robert Taunt. Talked to him on the phone, I don't know how many times. Met him first time last week. My poor wife was tortured by the two of us back and forth for about 45 minutes, which was wonderful. He has brought the stories of what I personally believe is the greatest book written about steamboating, written by George Byron Merrick, Old Times on the Upper Mississippi. I just reread it in the last 2 weeks in preparation for tonight. And so he has been our third presenter. I have some information on George Byron Merrick that I will distribute to you later this evening if you have any need for it. Plus, wander around in here. So if you've been here before, we have new exhibits up. We have a spiral bridge over here. Our logging exhibit has expanded. We've added photos to our screens. And this is a 2-year show. It is a living entity. Some things will come down, some things will go up, some things may come out again. And as I said, I have many helpers that make this possible. Now, August 8th, you will be tortured again by me. And I will continue what he started. I have been teaching steamboat classes at the University of Minnesota for the last 4 years, and so I will flesh out a little more of what the steamboats did around the country and around the world. So I can't thank you enough for coming tonight. Please spend some time, wander through, look at our book collection.
And let me just give you a postscript. Merrick's book goes side by side with Twain's book. Twain is about the lower river, and Twain's book is fiction. Merrick's book is fact. And so it is very important. It contains a lot of details about the river and the old boats. And take a look at George Merrick's life. He was a wonderful man. He fought in the Union Army from 61 to 65. Twain was in the Confederate Navy for 3 weeks, and he quit and went to California, okay? After the war, George Merrick taught Sunday school to black children in Baltimore. At that time, that would have been highly controversial. He did all sorts of things. He was an accountant for the UW Board of Regents. I don't think he was qualified for that, but he was for many years, and lived to be in his 90th year. He's buried in Madison with his wife and his daughter, and some pictures as he aged. He ran a grocery store with Welsh in Madison for a while. It was not successful. And here's his sister Elizabeth. Elizabeth Gates is buried in the cemetery out here, and Cornelia, George's mother, is buried out here. George and his wife and his daughter are buried in Madison. His brother Sam went west and is in Washington State. He had a little, he camped in a Civil War tent for many years in Madison on a little lot they bought on Lake Monona, and then eventually built a little house there. And in later years, he was laid up. He'd suffered heat stroke during his time in the Army, actually fell off his horse, and that affected him in later years. But there's his stone, and it says, "Off watch." But he's a good citizen. He's your hometown boy, and we should remember him because he was a very good fellow.
And the stories that we fall into. Just last week, a lady sent me an email to track down an old river pilot, old steamboat pilot. Didn't know about him. His name was a little familiar. Well, she claims that George Byron Merrick wrote the obituary for this guy in Madison. So we have a history mystery, which we love. So thank you again tonight, folks.
Yes, thank you.
Another successful evening. We hope to continue our speakers series tomorrow morning. We have Grandma and Grandpa's Great Loop Adventure, a book written by two ladies from Prescott. They are retired teachers, and Kelly is the author. Her and her husband lived on the river for 35 years, traveled extensively up and down the rivers, and was the drawings were done by Gene Halverson. So tomorrow morning at 11 o'clock, we have another show. So be well and do good things. Thank you.